That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, right here.
Same place. Oh, you want to I was reading the break that came and reading this lady and her kids that go to that church. And my whole family is she was talking to inside about and both she and her husband are blind, and they have three yes, right. And I think they and she has something to do. I think once or twice she didn't get it. But I'm very glad I yield to them as to crossing the eyes. The kids agree that those
Good evening and welcome to this 20th University of Maryland School of Social Work Thursz lecture, From Activism to Accomplishments, Promoting Social Justice from the Streets of Baltimore to the Halls of Congress. I'm Rick Barth, always the proud dean and never more proud than tonight to be the dean of this school and to welcome all of you here today. Your presence indicates your connection to the school and that you too are looking to further our conversation regarding social justice, our nation's future, and to hear observations and strategies from one of our very own, the Honorable Barbara Mikulski, MSW grad with a great class of 1965. Welcome alumni, wave if you're alumni. All right. Current faculty, lots of you, staff and students, Board of Advisors members, who I will also call out, Myrna Goldberg, Catherine O'Donovan, Katie Ryan Leakin, I hope has made it, and Meadowlark Washington, so glad to have you here. And I know that President Perman is hoping to get here, but he sent me a note saying he has President's Clinic on Tuesday afternoon and that his docket was very full for today and he wasn't sure if he would make it, but that was his intention. Today's discussion from our school's roots, grows from our school's roots, from Daniel Thurz's impact on the school and our deeply held values. Dan Thursz was the school's second dean and a true champion of social justice. He would have delighted in all of the past 19 Thursz lectures that Michael Reich has organized that have furthered this dialogue of addressing social concerns and social justice. But perhaps none might have pleased him more than this 20th lecture as we hear from a dean friend of Daniel's and the Thursz family, Senator Mikulski. Tonight I'm so pleased to welcome Daniel's life partner, his wife Hadassah, as well as Dan's children and partners and grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Hadassah. Much more information on Dan's exceptional career and impact can be found in your program. This lecture series was instituted in conjunction with the Thursz Distinguished Professorship in Social Justice, now held by Professor Michael Reich. I want to take a moment just to thank and recognize Michael for organizing today's event and co-creating it with Senator Mikulski and our very talented development and events team for coordinating tonight's activities. When I arrived here at the school as dean, there was great excitement about filling this role of the Thursz Professorship, the first named and endowed professorship in the history of the school. The Thursz Search Committee did a remarkable job and reached back eventually to a former member of our faculty who had gone on to an already illustrious career as a leader in social justice, in social work profession, and was now teaching after several other leadership roles at the University of Michigan. Luring Michael Reich away from the University of Michigan was even better than the New York Yankees luring Babe Ruth from the Boston Red Sox. Professor Reich has done a remarkable job these last 11 years. He's a respected leader of the faculty, a much admired teacher, and his research and scholarship has earned him an appointment to the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare. His assistance in creating a memorable 50th anniversary for the school, as well as leadership in securing outstanding speakers for the SWACO's 20th and 25th anniversary celebrations, have also helped enhance the impact of the Thursz Professorship and the reputation of the school. Particularly, I call your attention to the incredible list of all the Thursz speakers in your program who have graced our school with their insight and challenged our perceptions of social justice over the last 11 years. Indeed, our Thursz lectures represent a wonderful array of the many interesting aspects of social justice, and we look forward to adding Senator Mikulski to that list tonight. Certainly, the senator needs little or no introduction. Those specifics of her remarkable career of service can also be found in your program. Her impact on legislation will last many generations, indeed, probably forever. and her exceptional tenure as the longest-serving representative in congressional history is legendary. The recent 10th anniversary of the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which Senator Mikulski spearheaded, is just one stanchion of her phenomenal legislative legacy, and I recognize that many of you probably do that today is actually Fair Pay Day. I recall the words I share the words of President Obama when he awarded the Senator the Presidential Medal of Freedom, our nation's highest civilian honor. Her social work career in Baltimore, President Obama said, jump-started one of the finest public service careers we've ever seen. And for decades, Barbara has been a lioness on Capitol Hill, fighting for working families, fighting for high-tech, high-paying jobs, fighting for the prospect of America's women and girls. Thank you, Senator Mikulski, for all of that and much more. Perhaps what is most remarkable about this evening is the history and synergy that come together in this lecture. It was at Daniel Thursz Memorial Service that Senator Mikulski, stirring remarks calling for the creation of a professorship to commemorate his legacy. $1 million later, indeed a daunting challenge for a school that was brand new. Over 100 donors had come together to build this fund, and I'm proud to report that the Thursz Fund continues to grow thanks to dedicated benefactors. Also remarkable is the decades that Professor Rice and Senator Mikulski have been colleagues in this work for social justice. I believe they may have met as early as 1981 when Michael was asked to serve as Congresswoman's campaign manager. And that is the beginning of a very long relationship, which I'm sure doesn't end tonight, but which has a great opportunity to inform all of us tonight. So without any further ado, I'm here to introduce our esteemed colleagues, Professor Michael Rice and Senator Barbara Mikulski.
Thank you, Dean Barth, and thank you all very much for coming. Senator, it's a pleasure to see you here, and thank you again for all the work that you've done. You started your career as a social worker in the child welfare field. What led you to become an advocate, and which person's ideas or events influence your views about social justice?
Well, first of all, Michael, good to see you again.
Thank you.
20 years, huh? So now you'll soon be joining the vintage elders crowd. But that's okay. First of all, I do want to answer the question, but I would like to thank you very much for the invitation to be the participant at the annual Thursz lecture and on this important benchmark in your own life's journey and transition, and to be here with the Thursz family. As many of you know, I was part of that first class that came to the School of Social Work. Hard to believe that it was over 50 years ago, and I'll talk more about how I got here and what that meant. And I would have never known what my life would be, and I never knew where the school would be. And I'd like to really compliment the University of Maryland School of Social Work, the outstanding leadership we've had in its deans. One, always the right dean at the right time, for the times, and then, of course, an enormously dedicated faculty. And so I'm very pleased to be here. You know, I grew up with service in my DNA. My mother and father had a little neighborhood grocery store in Baltimore, in a neighborhood called Highlandtown, over in East Baltimore, on the Outer Banks of Canton, now called, the neighborhood would now be called Brewers Hill. My father and mother were not involved in politics, but they were involved in church, Roman Catholic, the Ethnic Heritage Society, Polish Women's Alliance, but what we were involved with was the community. If Beckham Steel went on strike, my father went on credit. If someone had a health setback, no one had to worry about were they going to have food on the table or the right food for the surgery that they just had. And my father's attitude was always, pay me when you can. And so we grew up in that. I was also educated in Catholic schools. I went to the same Catholic girls' high school as Nancy Pelosi. And but in our faith, the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, hunger and thirst after justice, be concerned and organized for the poor. So I grew up with service, went to work at Catholic Charities as a child, as a social worker in foster care. Then I wanted to prevent family breakup, went to social services, went in a field called protective services, child neglect and child abuse, a searing experience for a young woman. This was during the 60s and change was in the air. And the more I tried to help families that had been to court, the more I saw that the abuse was not abuse, but the neglect was coming from society. Poverty, the corrosive effect of poverty, the insidious effect of racism. And the more I saw that these were changes, and where was the opportunity ladder to get up and out? I heard a lot about bootstrap, but people didn't have shoes. And at the same time, President Kennedy wanted to help the other America, and so reform was in the air. And I wanted to be part of it. And I went to Catholic University because I felt I was more talented in group work. So I talked to this long, lanky, really big guy named Dan Thursz, who was guru status in group work, and he said, well, I think you'd like group work. You've done some of it where you're working. But I'm going to the University of Maryland School of Social Work, and we're starting a new field called community organization. And I think it's your cup of tea. Come with me and I can get you a NIH grant. And because it was community mental health, they were actually going to train people to work in the field. And I thought, roll the dice, in-state tuition. I could live easily at home. And I came and it changed my life. And that's how I did. But it was the effect of seeing people where they were, as Cloward and Piven said. Remember Cloward and Piven?
Yes.
Blame the victim, blame the poor for being poor.
Okay, thank you. Looking fast forward, you've accomplished a lot in your career as a city councilwoman, as a representative, and as a senator and chair of the Appropriations Committee. What accomplishments in your career are the greatest sources of satisfaction and pride to you? And to what do you attribute your ability to achieve those accomplishments?
Well, first of all, I believe in working on both sides of the aisle. And if you're in Congress, and particularly if you're in the Senate where there's only 100 people, you have to get the votes to be able to have a filibuster majority. But I'll come back to that as we talk about some other issues. What I'm most proud of is the way I have worked to empower people. When I ran for the Baltimore City Council, the political machines were in charge of Baltimore. And I came out of grassroots advocacy to stop a highway where we put together a citywide coalition, an interracial coalition at a time when they said blacks and whites wouldn't even talk together. Baltimore was a segregated town, deeply segregated and deeply divided. But we put it together. And then out of that came not only words, the poverty program saying maximum feasible participation of the people affected, but we changed politics to try to move power more into the community and the neighborhoods in a way. We broke the political machine. Don't tell that part to Pelosi because her brother was mayor. But at the same time, one of the things that I did, when I went to the Senate, I was the only woman, there were only two other women there. Senator Nancy Casselbaum of Kansas, a wonderful person, and myself. And I was the first Democratic woman elected in her own right and wanted to be the first of many. So when more women came, I kept a night, they came the year of the woman, I was there 5 years. And I began to run power workshops. After the Anita Hill debacle, first year of the woman, more women came, and I ran a power workshop. So the press said, "Are you having a tea for the ladies?" And I said, "No, I'm having a power workshop for the women of the Senate." And that was how to get started, get on committees. And we kept that going. It also then led to the famous dinners that we had, and they've been going on for 25 years, and the last bastion of civility.
So you
Does that
think,
sound like social work?
as you once said, and I often quote, I footnote you, I promise, you said that politics
That's okay, just don't tell Bob.
Okay. That you said that politics is social work with power, and I always like that quote. So how, using these advocacy skills and your ability to work across the aisle, what specific legislative or fiscal accomplishments do you feel are the most important of your career?
Well, first of all, I believe that the best ideas come from the people, and that you listen to the people's day-to-day needs, that while I was sent there to work on macro issues, it was the macaroni and cheese issues. So by listening to the people, and also doing what I call dino tours and things like that. And one of the things was also wanting to make the personal political. My dear father died of the consequences of Alzheimer's. And as we would go and we watched the spend down of families to qualify for Medicaid, you know that, and it could be how people were losing their home or in the world losing the family farm. And I drafted and passed legislation called Spousal Impoverishment Act, where you did family responsibility, yes, but family bankruptcy, no. It guaranteed a safety net for the surviving spouse. And AARP told me in the 20-plus years that I've had passed that legislation, over 100,000 people have not lost their home or their farm or their livelihood or places. But it was just singular. It's the social work thing. Listening to the stories of the people. What does that mean in terms of public policy? Making sure the bureaucracy serves the people don't serve the bureaucracy.
You were instrumental in getting, as Dean Barth said, the Lilly Ledbetter Act passed. There has always been a lot of opposition to the issue of gender equality in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
Still is, right. How did you use your advocacy skills to persuade your other senators who may have been reluctant to back it to support that legislation?
Well, it was really power politics. I mean, it was a very dramatic time. President Obama had been elected. He had campaigned on the Lilly. One of the things was on the Lilly Ledbetter bill. On the day of inauguration, when the president gives his eloquent speech in the poem, the Senate always has a to welcome the first family. And on the way, President Obama and Mrs. Obama to the Senate, he came a seizure, and he never comes back to the Senate. We're stunned. We welcome the president. There's a bit of a quiet time at the Senate. 2 days later, I get a call. The White House wants to talk to you. And God, you sit up and you want to get a new outfit to take the call. And it was President Obama, and he said, we had served in the Senate, and he said, Barbara, Teddy's sick. We're organizing for health care. I'd like you to carry Lilly Ledbetter across the finish line. And I began to organize because we held hearings. We began to move on legislation. And because we had started these workshops before Obama was elected, I went to the women and said, we can move Lilly. K.B.L. Hutchinson said, but I disagree with you. And I said, we agree on goal, but not on tactics. Let's practice what we said at the dinner. We would be a zone of civility. We would follow a regular order of process. You offer your amendments, let's duke it out and let it go. It was following what social work says, starting with the dinners. Meet people where they are. Don't make them ask them to be something they're not. We agreed at our first dinner. The only thing we could agree on was two things: that we would be a zone of civility and that we would work on breast cancer research money. But over time, we got to know each other. We developed mutual respect. Starting with that led to mutual trust. So when I came to Lilly, they would not object to the process. We brought it to the floor. I offered the bill. Kay offered 9 amendments. People said it was one of the most informed debates that they had had. I won, of course. And that's how we got it. But it started way back then. And it starts with, again, those social work principles. Meet people where they are. Treat people with respect. Develop trust. And always function with integrity. And that's the way it developed.
Thank you. One of the things that students always bring to our attention is that there are so many social justice related issues facing our country today. And it's hard for them to decide where to put their energies. So what do you think are the issues of highest priority? And how do you think social workers can make a decision about where to focus their limited time and their resources?
Well, first of all, I think that the issue of income and social disparities are the challenge of our time. And we must deal with the disparity situation. And deal with it aggressively and forcibly and so on through a variety of ways. And then the other, we must continue the battle of recognition of all Americans having worthy of respect. We've got to deal with these isms. We have to deal with racism and homophobia and all of those things that seem to separate us when we have more in common than what we are. For social work, though, everybody, I could go around the room. Everybody's got a different interest. They want to go to work in different fields. I've been seeing all the wonderful and diverse majors you have now, things that weren't here when I was here, Michael, like financial social work. I think that's terrific, really, and better than interventions through your work than people losing those homes and so on. And so here's what I think. The Marines have a saying, and I'm going to share it with you. Be best at what you're best at, and be best at what you're needed for. So you think about what you're best at, and then think about what you're needed for, and then get involved, either in the workplace or as volunteers, with a candidate you believe in, a cause you believe in, or a nonprofit that you want to support, and then just stick with it. Don't be sidelined with this tweet or starting this new group or whatever. Best at what you're best at, be best at what you're needed for, pick a candidate, cause, or a nonprofit, and just stick with it.
What do you mentioned the issue of socioeconomic inequality. What do you think are some approaches that might be effective in narrowing that gap?
Well, first of all, I think we need to repeal the tax bill. And when you're cutting research at NIH by 13%, just think of what research on the brain would do as social workers when just the A words, autism, Alzheimer's, ALS. The other is when you cut money for Special Olympics, the blind, autistic children, I think one less shot for somebody could help out. So and then the other is we really do have to raise the minimum wage. Now everybody says it costs a lot, but it costs a lot not to raise it. The other is, let's get back to empowerment. We really need to focus on our schools and on a real, genuine opportunity ladder where we close the achievement gap and we also close the aspiration gap so that people believe that their future. Condoleezza Rice, another person I've worked with hands-on, says it best, that education is one of the top civil rights issues of this time. And I think that's what we need to do. So social work needs to really, in Maryland, focus on this Kerwin Commission. Kerwin. Kerwin is the one that's going to set the formula and set the standards on education. If we don't get Kerwin passed, adopted, and funded, then we're at a disadvantage. The other, in talking with Dr. Barth and also Dr. Perman, we're going to be doing a census. We are 1 year from this week of the census. As colleagues, because I'm really trying to spearhead this, over 85% of all federal funds coming to this city, from special ed, Section 8, all are formula-based. Very few grants, no earmarks. So if we really want to give Baltimore City a raise, we've got to get an accurate census. And I believe the School of Social Work, working with the City of Baltimore and its Census Count Committee, could do a lot to make sure we have no hidden figures. That everybody counts in this country, everybody needs to be counted so we get our fair share.
Thank you. You mentioned before how you worked across the aisle. Since you started in Congress in 1977, the political atmosphere in this
Well, you helped me in my 80 campaign.
Thank you.
He was pretty good, actually.
Thank you. The environment has been... My students would tell you that's one of the few times they've seen me speechless. The environment today is much more partisan than it was when you started. I mean, there are stories, they may be apocryphal, of Tip O'Neill as speaker and Ronald Reagan sitting and having a drink and smoking a cigar together. We can't imagine that happening today. Social media and talk radio have fueled this partisanship. How can social workers use their skills in this very different atmosphere to cut through the noise? And also, even among people who are in favor of social justice, we seem to have a tendency to stand in a circle and shoot at ourselves rather than shoot outward. What would be your recommendation? We have a lot of, I see familiar faces here, we have a lot of social justice advocates in the room. What would be your recommendation for them to break through that hyper-partisanship and to stop fighting among ourselves and, choose our targets more effectively?
Well, first of all, don't give up. Don't give up, and don't give in. Show up, stand up, and speak up. And you can do it, first of all, one, I believe in protest. I got started in politics as a protester fighting that highway. But you also, sounding like Dr. Chaikin, be clear on your objective. What is the objective we seek? For any of you who are Chaikin alumni, you remember that phrase. And you never know who you're going to impact. I believe social work needs to work through their professional associations or other advocacy NGOs, like an ACP, like the Urban League, et cetera, some of the women's groups, and go at it. And just keep showing up and speaking up, whether it's in the city council, whether it's in Annapolis. And also, when people are doing a good job, and I'm thinking of Congressman Cummings, Ben Cardin, Van Hollen, our Maryland, 90% of our Maryland delegation, and let them know that. But you've got to do it. Now, people say, well, I worry about this, I don't want to, because I've heard this, I'm a professor now over at Hopkins, what about, is this going to affect, are people going to affect my getting a grant? Could I be whatever? I said, no. If you work through your associations, it's great. I will tell you, when social workers came on Capitol Hill or came with other groups, it was and continues to be terrific. So you have to keep at it. And you never know. You know, I want to name one of the women senators that I worked with on prosthetic devices for women veterans who had lost a limb, Senator Joni Ernst. Senator Ernst is from Iowa. She has seen military combat herself. She is far more conservative than I am. But when we heard how from the VA and women's veterans that the prosthetic devices were not designed to fit women, and in fact were causing more problems during their rehab because of just the multiple effect of a ill-fitting prosthetic. And we wanted to change that, and it needed more money, and I spoke to Senator Ernst. Now remember, I was looking for a colleague and a co-sponsor. I was not looking for a bridesmaid. So we got to get off of, are we going to be, brother? And Senator Ernst said she'd been hearing the same thing. We teamed up. We went to the Armed Services Committee, Senators McCain and Senators Jack Reed. As soon as they heard about it, we brought the data. We began to work to change. And that's also another thing about the women of the Senate. We always took the position. It wasn't girls versus boys. We believe that men of quality always support women when we fight for equality. But there we were. So Senator Ernst and I would disagree on term limits, balanced budget veto. I mean, I could list about 15 things. But we agreed on that, and you go for it. Does that help you out?
Yeah, thank you. Going to take just a short break to do a little process here. We passed out index cards when you registered. We're going to have a little bit of time at the end.
Process.
You can take the boy out of group work, but you can't take the group work out of the boy. Please, if you have a question, write it down as neatly as possible, pass it to the aisle. We know that the center aisle, we're only going to be able to get a few of those, but we'll do them if you can. Thank you.
And I'll be collecting them on the center aisle.
One of the things that's, when you spoke about the Lilly Ledbetter Act or other legislation, you talked about the time it takes to nurture relationships and trust, to educate people about the merits of an issue, and that enables you to work across the aisle. One of the things that the 24/7 news cycle does today is it makes everything into a contest like, March Madness, and it also, it creates, everything becomes a crisis. Every time I see one of those things flash across the bottom of the TV screen, I want to turn off the television, because they make everything seem like if we don't resolve it by dinner, the world's going to come to an end. Since social work as a profession and advocacy as a piece of social work, it requires time and stamina and constancy of effort. How can we break through this 24/7 cycle in which people tend to speak in sound bites rather than, in substance?
Well, I want to come back to that, but I want to talk about another social work principle. And because I think what we have seen with the 24-hour news cycle and the rise of cable, are we getting news or are we getting propaganda? And I'm not talking about the fake news, which is really digital disinformation or computational propaganda. It is really quite serious and really requires sociology and the talents of people in this room. But one of the things we were taught as social workers, in addition to meeting people where they were, all people worthy of respect, is judge not. Judge not. And when the Year of the Women came, about a year or two after that, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson of Texas was elected to the Senate. I'm working in my office. my staff comes in and says, Senator Hutchinson would like to talk to you. I said, sure, I'll call her right back. My staff said, ooh, what do you want to talk with her for? You know, she's that Republican from Texas, and we think she's conservative, and yeah. And I said, but she's another senator, and she wants to talk to me, and we act respectfully. Her staff, in the meantime, when she said, I would like to talk to Senator Mikulski, ew. What do you want to talk to her? The fiery liberal, the mouthy, you got it. Barricade bald. So when I called Senator Hutchinson back, she had an economic empowerment idea for women. If you were a homemaker, first off, if you worked in the marketplace, a woman could contribute at that time X number of thousands of dollars, I think it was 2 or 3, to your personal IRA. But if you were a full-time homemaker working at home, or did workplace work, home-based, you could only contribute $500. Now we're talking about your money, gender disparity, gender, we felt, inequity. So she asked me to join with her. Well, I wanted to think about it, know about it, etc. And we went out to dinner. And that's when we had such a good time. We talked about the bill, where it came from, where she came from, where I came from. And that's when we said, we had a good time. We never take the time to know each other. We're always either debating each other, yelling at each other, or having people yell at us. Why don't we just get together? And that's what began the dinners. She did not judge me. It was actually like a destiny phone call, and I salute her for taking the initiative. And I called her back. I judged not. A lifelong friendship came from it. Great legislation, the breast cancer legislation. Remember, Komen started in Texas. We really built an alliance. We built friendships and alliances and so on. But it started with judge not. Give somebody a break and see where you can go. And that would be one of the ways to go.
One of the things that students and many social workers are concerned about is that while they believe very strongly in advocacy for their clients and constituents and around issues, they're worried that if they engage in that too aggressively, they're going to lose their job, they may lose their funding, they may be marginalized in their organizations, and so forth. Or maybe they feel that, like you said, the Marines say, be your best at what you're best at. Some of them are better at working with individuals and families and may be too introverted to go speak in public. What advice would you give to people who are either concerned about losing their jobs or being marginalized, or feel like, I really believe in these issues, but I don't know if I have the right personality to engage at that level?
Well, let me talk about the personality thing, and then come back to concerns about your future standing. Some people are very introverted, and they really don't have it, they want to be in the march or whatever, or they prefer to work quietly, like with data, etc. Fine. In other words, I really believe that everybody can make a difference, and then when we put it together, we can make the change. Every group needs help. Every candidate needs someone quietly working on policy initiatives. It's great to talk about an idea, but is there evidence-based underpinnings to that idea? What are the unintended consequences to the idea? In other words, following the policy analysis rubric, helping do position papers. You don't have to be out on the barricade. You don't have to be knocking on a door or running a phone bank. You can participate. You don't have to go to the Hill or down to Annapolis, but you can help prepare the material for those who are and be part of the group that helps them be effective to do it. So I believe that goes to what your talent is. But I believe in working through organizations. And when we work through an organization, there's a certain amount of protection in that because you're working through the National Association of Social Workers or the Maryland chapter or Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Mothers Dealing with Opioids, or whatever. But if you work with the group, you're not going to be singled out. You cannot be singled out. And I think that that's one of the ways to go. And you know what? You might not be the person who marches, but you might be the person who helps organize the march. You know, one of the things, interestingly, in my class over at Hopkins, I want to talk about Rosa Parks for a minute. So, you know, there's that iconic picture. So a lot of people don't know what it takes to organize. They'll hold up their iPhone. And I really like these millennials, the dedication, the desire to change the world, to want to make a difference. It's just terrific. But they'll say, I went to the march, I got the T-shirt, we haven't ended racism yet. Is there a meeting or something that I've missed? And they say there's about 5,000 of them you're going to go to. But the fact is that when I held up the picture of Rosa Parks, this iconic picture of her sitting on the bus holding her handbag with her, proper hat, and then I talk about how Miss Parks trained for civil disobedience by being a member of the NAACP. How she went to this school that the labor unions organized that actually taught civil disobedience that Dr. King and Joe Hill and all the great organizers went to. And even got Hopkins for the freshman class to read a book called The Women Who Organized the Montgomery Boycott. The methodical nature of organizing, the planning, the risk-taking, and so on, but what all it takes to do something and to stick with it, and no matter what happens, to get back up and stick to it again. And when they read it, that's what really changes. And that's what social work needs to do, and that's what we need to do. We got to keep at it, show up, stand up, and speak up. And if you're not going to be the one to stand up and speak up, support those that do by your talents that you have in helping do the organizing, the planning, putting together the position papers, being on solid evidence-based grounds to do that.
You spoke about your work in the civil rights movement in the 60s and about fighting the expressway and how multiracial groups were able to cut through the divisions in the city to have success in those areas. It seems today that creating multiracial, multicultural coalitions is more challenging than ever, even though everybody within those groups is in favor of social justice. So how can we as advocates learn to work more cooperatively together and to create greater trust so that those kind of sustainable coalitions that were successful in the past can be created once again?
Well, the coalition for the road fight was made up of also groups that knew each other before or participated before the road fight. So let me back up and explain what I mean. So in the European ethnic, primarily white communities of East Baltimore was one part of the road fight, and there was the west side, which was primarily African American in the Rosemont community, first black homeownership neighborhood on west side. For those of us on the east side that in any way, and modestly foot soldiers in civil rights, I don't want to exaggerate positions or activism or so on, but they knew us or had heard of us through other groups. So when we talked or said we wanted to meet about getting together, there was some basis. In other words, there was a basis beforehand. And you have to look at it. What is the basis beforehand that you might have worked on? Then there was a meeting where we went out of our comfort zone, or at least East Side did. There was a hearing in West Side. And East Side, out of the Falls Point area. We got a bus to go over to support West Side. Well, when a busload of white people walked into the room and all took seats and had signs and so on in support of West Side, it was a little bit of a buzz. When the testimony began, one of the men from East Side, Frank Mikulski, I'll never forget it because it was so powerful. Frank went down and said, you know, I'm a veteran. I fought for my country. And I fought for my government, and now I have to fight my government for my home. And I'm going to stand with my brother veterans that I know from American Legion, and name some of the groups, and I'm going to stand with them. And I ask all the veterans in the room to come up and stand shoulder to shoulder together. And black and white men got up together and stood shoulder to shoulder. That expressway fight changed that night. And it changed the people in the room. It changed us for the rest of our lives. We knew what coalitions meant. But there was a commonality there and a call to do something bigger than yourself, but to remember where we were in common. So that's what I think we need to do. And that's how we need to be able to be advocates.
This is a very different time. How can something like that be replicated today when people are more and more siloed in their own communities and their own
Don't be
worlds?
siloed. I mean, the way you not be siloed is don't be siloed. I was over in East Baltimore on Saturday and in Patterson Park, and they had a kite festival. Were you over there? Were you there? You've got the yellow. What'd you see? What does everybody mean to you? You saw all kinds of folks in that park. Multi-ethnic, multiracial, dads, men as well. You know, the little kids with the little bow in their hair. There's things that just melt you. And so, but you see, we need to be able to hold events. We need to be able to bring people together. Where even socially, people are just saying, well, wait a minute, this is great. This is who we are. Well, then it's fighting for the park, and then it's fighting for recreation. And right there is the Blue Ribbon School that Matt Hornback runs at Linwood and Eastern. And all of a sudden, you're building, and so on. You know, you're social workers, you know process. You know, change is not an event, though it's built on events. It's a process. And I think that's the way you begin to break through. And then groups need to find common ground. I believe this census could be a great community building event. It could be one of the best community building events we've had in Baltimore in a long time. Because we're not pitting neighborhood against neighborhood. We're making sure that in every neighborhood and every group has a say and that nobody gets lost. Whether it is truly the homeless, or it's communities of color that are often overlooked and definitely undervalued. And this could be it if we have this community counts committee and that people are working together, and it's just for 1 month. But at the end of that month, we would have done something, to quote Dan Thursz in organizing, something that's specific, immediate, and realizable. We would have come together in a common cause, a common objective in which we will all benefit. Nobody loses because of the participation. And at the end of it, we would have gotten to know each other, trusted each other, and then I think going on to do other things.
Thank you. Many people feel that politics, particularly electoral politics, is dirty and inevitably corrupt. Why do you think social workers should engage with the political process as you did? And if they do, how can they become effective agents in the political arena and remain committed to their codes of ethics?
Well, first of all, I think that the way you change politics is by being involved in politics. And that's why I said earlier, pick a candidate you believe in or a cause you believe in and get the candidate to adopt the principles and advocacy of that cause. I think I'm going to go to the federal level now for a minute. One of the worst things that happened in terms of federal politics was a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United. Wow, what a bummer. And it meant unlimited money. It meant secret money. And really almost like a legal way of money laundering. And I think, and it led to really a money chase and race. And as long as you have those demands and those pressures, you're going to be involved. We've got to really change campaign finance reform. It's very wonky. It's a very wonky issue. You know, it doesn't get, unless you're Beto O'Rourke, jumping up on a table talking about it. And so on. But I think that is one of the big issues. At the local and state level, it's really making a difference. I mean, when I ran, reform was in, for city council, reform was in the air. I believe it will come out now of this recent setback that we're facing in the city, a sad, very sad setback here, that there will be reform. In 2020, we have another city election for mayor and for city council. It's a chance to put in people who you believe in and people who you believe in because they will make a difference. And I think that's the way to go. But if you say, I don't want to do that, well, you don't have to do it, but if you want to change, you do it.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question that came from the audience.
And a pink card, there
really.
you go.
Oh, we have color. It's very colorful. Okay. What is your advice for young female social workers who want to run for office?
Well, first of all, if you've never run, get involved in a campaign and see what it's like. I believe that, and also if you're a Democrat, there is a group called Emerge, which trains young women, or not so young women, on how to run for office. And we have great people who came out of that group statewide, and I'm a big backer of Emerge. If you don't have that, or remember the other party, because we should not give our political parties over to extremes. There are a lot of very fine Republicans who would like to be perhaps more fiscally conservative or so on, but more socially moderate or socially progressive agenda. So you have to learn how to run, and the best way to do it is help one person get elected and learn how to do it, really be in a campaign, and then get ready to run yourself.
Thank you.
You really have a lot of fun. You meet a lot of new people. You really do. You really like it. And you meet all kinds of wonderful people.
The last question that I prepared, since this is the Thursz lecture and you were a student of Dr. Thursz, you spoke already about how he influenced you and shaped your career. While you were in Congress, how did your education as a social work graduate student influence your decision and policy making? And I guess the follow-up to that would be, someone from the audience asked a related question. What are some traits and skills that future social workers will need to be equally effective in whatever work that they do?
You know, being here changed my life. I think I would have had a good life. I think I would have been involved in helping people in social work, certainly. But I also applied to the University of Pennsylvania because you were Department of Social Services, everybody applied there. Maybe group work at Catholic U, which would have been a fine education. But here, there was, under Dan Thursz, and particularly that time, something in the air, because we were not only learning how to be good social workers and how to be community organizers. I brought here today my 12 guidelines for community organization, advocacy, and public policy. I wrote these over 50 years ago when Dan asked me to speak at the Vista Training Center here, typed them out, and I have been using them just about every other day all of my life since then. Organize on a felt need. Pull together a handful of people who will do it. Identify your goals, strategy, and action steps. Make them specific, immediate, and realizable. What do we want to accomplish? What are the facts? Who's got the power to solve the problem? Who's got the lever on the decision makers? And then it goes on. So these principles that we learned, but it started with basic social work principles. But with here, well, it was the principles, meet people where they are, the whole issue of trust, the whole issue of judge not, all of those things were incorporated into what it was. The other was also, under Dan Thursz, was the beginning of the poverty program, the Great Society. We were in classes here with people that were designing Vista, Dan's great work on that. We were hearing about Wilbur Cullen doing Medicaid and Medicare, all of these new things that were happening. I got, you're gonna love this, a community mental health grant. Now, I don't think I quite have the therapeutic personality that some of my clinical people had, but I've tried to make a better world here. But to answer your question, you see, what we learned here was not just to apply with clients. It was an attitude. It was a lifestyle. It was a lifetime commitment. It's not a job. It's not a career. It's a vocation. It's a calling. It becomes part of your DNA. And like DNA, it's our job to pass it on to others, including the next generation.
Thank you.
And that's what we learned here.
I've got a couple of questions about
Is it hot in here? Or is it these lights? Do they do open heart surgery in here?
only
Time for a
only
drink.
at faculty meetings.
What are we doing with that thing? Are we live streaming? Or are you just taking pictures? Okay. Now, I always like to know whether or not being live streamed, it's a whole new vocabulary. Right?
I've got a couple of
okay.
questions from
It's
the
okay.
audience about issues that are subjects of ongoing controversy, and people wanted to hear your view of them. To paraphrase the questions, one of them is the issue of climate change, about which there's a real sense of urgency. And yet, sometimes proponents of taking action face the obstacles that the environmental movement gets labeled as, tree huggers or people who don't really care about people. So what's your vision for what we can do as in the state of Maryland, for example, in terms of taking action on this very urgent issue?
Well, first of all, climate change is here. It's not like something that's coming. It's here. It's here already, and it's affecting lives and livelihoods. When we look at lives, and I'll come now to the social work, I believe one of the ways to mobilize is also the effect that climate change and environmental degradation is having on children. One big thing is the rates of asthma, which I know is a policy focus here at the University of Maryland campus and over at Hopkins at Broadway. And I think that by working on those kinds of issues, and to say, I know the city council's taken it up about the air in Baltimore. And what I'm saying is, we want to save the planet. but all politics is local. So let's start here with what is the environmental degradation we're facing and what can we begin to do. And I think clean air and clean water are naturally things, but let's do it not only from some abstract approach, but really its impact on people. And I believe, like organizing the children's advocacy groups, I mean, this asthma is really serious. The other, Freddie Gray. I want to talk about Freddie Gray a minute. Freddie Gray was cognitively impaired because of lead paint in his house. Freddie Gray died many times before he got in that van. That horrible, horrible, horrible day. I don't know what happened in that van, but I know what happened in his house when he ate paint chips like potato chips. I know what happened in his school when the water fountain had lead in it and nobody knew, and he was drinking it. So we can focus on those things. We can focus on lead paint in housing. We can focus on lead paint in our schools. This isn't something that happens in Ohio. It's happening right here. And by the way, I'd like to salute this campus totally, and this school in particular, for the wonderful work you're doing in West Side. I hear all kinds of wonderful examples and stories about it, and I'd like to really congratulate the leadership and all of those that are doing it. But if we start with that, I think we can go, and that raises consciousness, and it brings people together. And one of the things that I do a lot of talking about in my class, now in order to get into med school, you've got to take a sociology course. So I co-teach this sociology course, and one is that if you're going to be a doctor, your patients live in a social context. And one of the things we talk about is exactly what I'm talking about now, which is we need to be working on things like lead paint. Lead paint. Lead paint's been around in Baltimore for over 80 years. 80 years. And this is where the coalitions come from. Just think, West Side moms, the gentry and gentry neighborhoods. I could elaborate. But the other thing we do talk about is something called zip code determinism.
Yes.
And I'd encourage you to use this phrase. It's not unique to me, though. I've troubadoured a lot. It is amazing, amazing and melancholy, that right this very minute, the zip code that we are born in will be more determinative of our lives and our life expectancy than our genetic code. So I grew up in Highlandtown, around Patterson Park. I now live around Roland Park. And if we look at another lady of my age who lives around Harlem Park, my life expectancy is 20 years longer. Now, it's not that I'm a better person, and that's even controlling for violence. What the hell is that? That's wrong. That is absolutely, absolutely, absolutely wrong. And this is where, again, we have to return to reason, scientific facts, the use of data. Remember, data validates but doesn't motivate. Personal stories do, social workers. But at the same time, look at that. This is where we can change the environmental movement, because why is it? Different kind of food, better air, though we were in industrial, we could go through the indices. And I think the way to approach this is to begin to talk about zip code, talk more and more and more about zip code determinism. More determinative than your genetic code. Look, I love the med school guys and Dr. Reese and Dr. Perman, and they talk about personalized medicine. Hoorah, hoorah. But if you're going to do personalized medicine, you've got to start with what those kids are learning, what kind of school they're in. If they've got mold in the school, in the building, and lead in the water fountains, and they're bringing that in, one of the new blessings is to bring water into the school. So I'm fired up about this. And I want you to be fired up about it too, because you do know. Really, one of the reasons I wanted to do this was not only my respect for Dan Thursz and what all he meant in the school that was created around those founders, and the way the legacy has been continued with the kind of leadership that's in the school and the great faculty, Michael and others, etc. But also to talk to you, because I knew students were going to be here. It is your time. It is your turn. You have to seize it. You have to seize it and work on it. I'm happy to give tips and ideas and suggestions, but you have to pick it up and do it. So, and if you want to change the next election, you've got to really get out there and make sure this generation is standing up.
One of the things, to get to another issue of controversy that connects with what you were just saying, zip codes in Baltimore and in many other parts of the United States are closely correlated with race. And, it's been said so many times that racism and slavery are the original sin of the United States, and Maryland played a key role in that. One of the solutions, or partial solutions, to institutional racism is the provision of reparations for the descendants of slaves. What form, do you think that reparations might be a partial solution to institutional racism? And if so, what form do you think it should take?
I think I'm going to come back to process again and recognize the racism against people of color, certainly African Americans, and then what we did to Native Americans. Certainly in California, there was the Asians, et cetera. So, but really, slavery, you just can't believe that another human being would be treated like a commodity. But I also looked to South Africa on the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And I believe as we would look at what are the best ways to right the grievances is that we need to come to grips with who we are and what our history is. And the way, and that part of the process at arriving what would be a just way to think about this and to proceed on it. Do you do it through individuals? First of all, do you do it at all? Do you do it through individuals? Do you do it through institutions to redress the reasons and not only systemic problems of the past, but the systemic problems now, this minute? But I do believe looking at South Africa and some other countries that have done it, move to some type of reconciliation process, because there are those who just don't want to believe that things happened or they weren't that bad, or that they weren't that bad. And but I do think now is the time to really seriously come to grips with it. And I'm glad that the discussion in reparations has started that kind of thinking about how we can make it begin to really redress this.
We have time to address a couple of more questions. Whether it's reparations or legislation around climate change or any of the other issues you've touched on tonight, one of the things, as you pointed out earlier, that sometimes happens is that policy change produces unintended consequences. How do you reconcile or come to terms with some of the unintended consequences of legislation that perhaps that you might have even supported? What do we do when those unintended consequences emerge?
Fix it. One of the basic methodologies of legislation is you have a 3-year reauthorization that by and large, most legislation that's passed is reauthorized every 3 years. Now, that doesn't mean you have a sunset. So like legislation, let's take violence against women. It doesn't like end at the end of 3 years, but at the end of 3 years, you're meant to review, refresh, and reform. What worked, what didn't? Did it really get to help to the people? Did it really get to people working in shelters, running the hotlines, doing prevention, new innovative ways of working with the police? Or did it just go to some state bureaucracy that, didn't really move on it? So, or wasn't effective. So one is that kind of process. But this talks about monitoring. And the other is to ask I know people want their elected officials to come to town halls. And town halls are great, so I support town halls. But town halls are like jump ball, okay? And they're great because they are improv. You could be talking about a child who's intellectually challenged. You could be raising a question about pre-existing conditions. And being a woman, you're going to be charged more for health insurance simply because you're a woman. 11 states counted rape during the pre-Obamacare. 11 states had rape as a pre-existing condition. So, yeah, but at the same time, how can we look at, so one would be the town halls, but the other is, one of the things I liked was roundtables. And what I liked about roundtables is I would have a single topic, and we would have groups that came, and it would be like, and again, best ideas came from the people. I wanted to know about special ed funding. When President Obama came in, we were going to do a big effort. And there was a mother, I went to Anne Arundel County, they have terrific programs there. And there was this lady there, she had a button on of a child with Down syndrome. And I asked her about it, and she said, well, this is my daughter, Rosa. And I'm part of a national group. My daughter is bullied every single day because of the R word, the word retarded. And we would like you to change the legislation to intellectually disabled. And we've talked in Annapolis, Ted Sophocles is advocating and so on. And I said that I would work on this under 2 conditions. Number one, it didn't disrupt Maryland law and see where it was going to go in Annapolis. And then the second was that it wouldn't inadvertently, by changing the name, shred or people would lose benefits that they were entitled to, either a public benefit or a private trust fund or whatever. In other words, really, because when I came back, so that would be an unintended consequence, where by changing one thing, we would be financially really harming someone. When I came back and started to work on it, I found that another senator by the name of Mike Enzi from Wyoming was working on this. Same national group, but he'd had a roundtable in Wyoming. Senator Enzi is a fairly conservative fellow, soul of civility, but fairly conservative, and his professional background is an accountant. And when I talked to him about this, he said, yes, I said, Mike, I hear you're working on it. He said, yes. And we decided to team up. We'd heard these poignant situations of the kids being bullied. And by the way, before the word retarded came into legislation, the word was feeble-minded. So the R word was considered in advance for its time. So we decided again, this best at what you're needed for. So Mike, we talked about the benefit issue. He said, I know all of these groups, the actuaries, the estate planners, all of their national associations, and let me take responsibility for that part of it. I took responsibility for working with the groups, the Kennedy Krieger people, the Easter Seal people, etc. You're the social worker, Bob. I'm the accountant, Mike. Do you know the Rosa law passed unanimously in the Senate on a voice vote? This is what I mean best at. Could we do that again? I think if you take one thing like that that had the national movement. Remember, it was the mothers, because the mothers began to call into the other senators, support the Enzi-Mikulski bill, the Mikulski-Enzi. By the way, the Rosa Law was signed, he graciously said, call it the Roses Law. It was signed into law by President Obama. And I was just with Rosa the other night at Anne Arundel County. She's getting ready to graduate from high school. And the school board awarded her School Citizen of the Decade because of what she and her family did to change public policy.
Last question. As much as I'm tempted to ask you to go on record and handicap the presidential race next year, I'm going to ask a different kind of a question. What should the people in the audience and those who are going to watch this when it's shown on video, what should they be looking for and listening for in the remarks, the debates, the position papers that so many candidates are going to put forward in the next, year and a half?
Well, first of all, look at a person's record. Not what are they promising, but how did they perform? What has been their record? And maybe some of their earlier record was something you wouldn't go for. But have they grown? Have they learned? Have they listened to the people? Have the actions and passions of this time shaped and enabled them? So one, look at their record. Second, I'm a very firm believer in personal integrity and in intellectual integrity. So when they're advocating ideas, where are they coming from, and are they willing to really support it? And then third, are their ideas really going to put our country, deal with our really significant economic issues? Remember the disparity issue I talked about. And then what is their viewpoint and what is their personality to really create a climate where we can begin to bring our people together. We cannot have a country where we view each other as the enemy, and where, and I'm not advocating censorship or something. I don't know how all of you are, but this social media can be pretty toxic. When Twitter first came in, I was really excited about it because I thought direct contact in real time with my constituents, we'd really kind of know, pulsing the people right away. I loved the idea. But what began to come through was violent, vulgar, and vicious. But we need leadership. And what is leadership? Leadership, first of all, creates a state of mind. And then it creates a climate where people, the best, begin to work on problems and to solve them. So it's not only their ideas, but can they bring out the best in people to work on the ideas that really move our country forward? Whether it's solving a particular problem or working to begin to create a dialogue on truth, justice, and reconciliation, which I think will eventually happen. But, so that's my view.
I think we
For
should.
history, it's doing a history. Your social workers do a history and see what the record is, and then integrity. If you don't have integrity, nobody trusts you. And if nobody trusts you, how do you work? How do you work? You have to have some trust. When I talked to Senator Ernst about the prosthetics, she trusted me that we would work together, that I wasn't setting her up to be my fool for a partisan advantage. We wanted to help the women's vets. When I spoke to Senator Enzi about my Rosa and his young lady in Wyoming, we were two people who had been listening to our constituents, who had said maybe many different things about a lot of things, but on this one thing, we could do it, and we did it. So, but you want a president who can do that. And you want a president who I also appoints a competent cabinet. And I think, and I see a lot of good applicants right here, I just say. But somebody who, again, has demonstrated that.
Well, thank you so much for being our elected.
Thank you. Good to be with everybody. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Bill. What a privilege to be here and hear you share our views.
Before we adjourn for our reception, I have one final announcement. Professor Reich has announced that he'll be retiring this May, which will be a great loss for all. And tonight marks his last Thursz lecture. So how fitting that he's finished it with Senator Mikulski. To mark his exceptional career as our school's first named professor and our first Thursz professor, we'd like to present him with this gift. Please join me in thanking Professor Reich for his years of service to the school and never stopping in his pursuit of social justice.
Can we play with the pictures? Everybody's been taking pictures. I'm starting to see spots in front of me. No, get a picture of him. Okay, go ahead. Wow. Wow. Hold it up. Wow.
Thank you.
Great. It's all been up to you.
Mike,
That's
we'd
great.
love to hang that here, but we know you might want to bring it home. If you do bring it home, we'll make a second copy. Thank you both.